Bonjour à tous, mon nom est Maxime Coquerel, merci pour votre patience. Cette présentation sera en anglais aujourd'hui. On a la chance d'être accompagné par Roy Kim. Roy est un Microsoft MVP sur les technologies Azure, est également un expert Kubernetes et un conférencier reconnu à travers l'Amérique du Nord. Nous voulons ce soir avoir une session interactive, donc n'hésitez pas à poser vos questions en français ou en anglais. Ce soir, j'ai la chance d'être accompagné par Tidjani qui m'aidera à faire la modération et la traduction des questions. Merci Tidjani pour ton aide. Maintenant, je vais faire la même introduction mais en anglais. Hello everybody, my name is Maxime Cockrell and I'm very glad to be here with you tonight. For this session, please let me introduce my friend Roy Kim. Roy is a Microsoft MVP on the Azure technology, a Kubernetes expert and an amazing speaker. We want to have an interactive session, so do not hesitate to ask your question in the chat on the left of your screen. And thank you, Tidjani, for your help. Roy, I'm giving you the floor.
Okay, great. Bonjour, everyone. Thank you for having me. So I'm based out of Toronto, and very glad to be joining your meetup tonight. So I'll be speaking on Azure Kubernetes in action, showing like multiple applications deployed in a Kubernetes cluster, and just to show kind of how that looks like and how to manage that. Okay. So a little bit about me. I'm been working with Microsoft technologies with 18 years, ranging with Azure, Office 365, Kubernetes, SharePoint. My early days .NET developer, and I'm an independent consultant. And feel free to check out my blog at roykim.ca. I write a lot of articles, and including the Azure topics. Okay, I went to the University of Toronto and studied computer science. So the agenda for today is really giving just a brief overview of what Azure Kubernetes service is, and then we will jump into kind of a demo of some running applications that's been deployed, touch on some Kubernetes concepts, okay, how to manage, right? What are some of the tools to use to manage that? We'll look at some monitoring of your cluster and your applications, and we'll end off in a Q&A. But throughout this presentation, I do encourage you to ask questions and to make it an interactive session. So I will be Maxime will be fielding the questions and in the chat, and I'll look to my side for any chat questions. Okay, awesome. So so the whole purpose of this presentation is really seeing what does a Azure Kubernetes cluster looks like that's got many applications deployed, because that's what basically Kubernetes you can do, is to densely pack and host many applications, right, in a very scalable and through with cloud native principles, right? So hopefully you'll come away with kind of how all the pieces work together, as some of the things I've mentioned, and that you have a better, stronger concept of what Kubernetes is, and kind of how the future of kind of hosting and running applications would look like, as this is a pretty hot concept. Okay, so what is Azure Kubernetes Service, right? So it's really a managed container orchestration service, okay? Managed meaning that you don't have to build your install and configure and build your virtual machines and from scratch, right? It's just basically kind of through the Azure portal, point and click and configure, and then you have a running cluster without going through installation steps and guides through like your traditional on-premises way. And through that, you have good load balancing, availability, auto scale capabilities, service discovery, and pod and container deployment. Okay, health monitoring, which I'll show, and basically, this also supports a microservices style architecture or applications. And if you're an IT kind of operations or developer, you focus more on the application workloads, like managing and deploying your apps, and not too much on your underlying infrastructure in terms of disk or networking. Although you do have to know those things and manage some of it, but you're not in the weeds that much. Well, I'll talk about that. Okay, and it provides a declarative approach of deployments through YAML manifest files, and that goes against the Kubernetes API, okay, management API. The beauty of kind of containerized applications and orchestration is, you're not stuck with a certain single OS like Windows or Linux. Or Java or .NET or Node.js. You can do them all, right, in a single Azure Kubernetes service cluster, okay, and leverage the cloud services such as event hubs, SQL databases, etc. Okay, so this is what very high level for those that are kind of very new to Kubernetes is. So really, there's two sides of the managed service, right? So there's customer managed, is really infrastructure service infrastructure, and then there's Azure managed, right? So the left side is really a black box, and this is where you have your API service to run commands to manage your cluster or deploy applications. The scheduler that deploys your applications to the necessary nodes that are available or has the capacity. etcd, kind of the database for your cluster for the management side. So this is a black box, and you don't really have to care about this stuff. Okay, so that's a benefit with Kubernetes service, right? And then there's the managed side, which is basically kind of some of the networking that you do have to kind of manage and configure, and your virtual machines, and I'll get into that more through the Azure portal. Okay, so what I'll show are basically these applications. So I have a guest book application and the book info and voting app. So why don't I just show that right now? So right here is a guest book application, and it's very simple. So you can even check it out, guestbookarchem.ca. I type in my name, hit submit, and then it records kind of the application. And then there's another application. This one is a very simple, extremely like just a standard hello world, and all it does is really shows this page. Okay, so yeah, for those that are new and starting out, you're probably seeing the Microsoft Azure Kubernetes documentation, the AKS, kind of the hello world. Starting from scratch, like deploying and making a Docker image and putting into container registry. So this is what the very basic tutorial has, this application. And then another application, a bit more sophisticated, is the book info app, which is a microservices style application. Okay. And really there's many pieces behind the scenes here, but I'll get into that later. And it has various microservices like the book reviews service, book details, this whole application, like the front end that serves us this entire web page is another service. So that's what that is. And then another service to show whether or not the stars, a red star or green stars. So that's another application in this all in this cluster. And let's see here, do I have another one? So okay, another one I have actually is a WordPress application. Okay, yeah, this one's not working, but this is an extra one I've been working on lately. But we'll focus on mostly on these for these three applications. Oh, actually, no, I have a voting app. Oh yeah, this one, another one here. So another application, voting app. So if you click on it, you vote cats or dogs, and then it tallies up, the vote percentages, right? So that's also in this cluster. Okay, so that's, and again, I'll share this deck, and if you want to try out those applications and deploy them, like here are the links here, and to read more about them. Let's see here. So how does the Kubernetes cluster, kind of like the architecture, look like, right? So I'll go through this kind of bit by bit. So right now, so this this dotted blue window is the, let's say, is the Kubernetes cluster itself, okay? And there's a concept called namespaces, right, where you deploy pieces of your application or shared services to support your applications into namespaces, right? And namespaces are just like logical containers, okay? And you can assign certain access rights, per team, or you can align it to your DevOps or project team. So one way of I have, let's say, in these blue boxes are really application-specific namespaces. So I have my book info app for this one, my voting app in this namespace, the guest book, and AKS Hello World. And then there's a namespace called Kube System, which is your just your system namespace that out of the box has the the core Kubernetes application, right? And another namespace called monitoring for monitoring your applications. So these are other open source software that you can deploy and install. Here's another one called Kiali. And then another namespace for exposing your services out to the internet or outside of the cluster, right? So I have two types of ingresses. Okay, one is Istio-based Ingress, right? Ingress controller, or your Nginx Ingress controller, right? So you don't have to have both of these, but it just shows the flexibility and power of Kubernetes, that you can just really pick and choose what kind of monitoring you want, how you want to expose your application outside of the cluster, let's say in this case out to the public internet. And so there's a tremendous amount of flexibility. And so this is just an example that I have how I've organized my applications into various namespaces, right? And within each namespace is actually the application, which has like these blue cubes, really depict like deployments, or you can say a set of pods, of each service. Okay, which I'll get into more. So before I go further, I like to pause. And are there any questions? I'm looking at the chat window. Anything, curiosities?
There are no questions right now.
Okay.
I will let you know if any.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I will move on then. So again, in summary, that's the namespace for applications, and then for namespace that are kind of supporting the applications, and that's what that's about. So what about, so I talked a lot about Kubernetes, but now in this next slide, what about Azure itself, right? What are those Azure services that support the Kubernetes cluster? Because remember, Kubernetes is just an open source software, okay, and it's installed. And but then what about load balancers and container registries and things like that, or databases, right? So so first of all, the cluster itself is really supported by a bunch of virtual machine nodes, okay? and I'll show that shortly through the Azure portal. And in my case, in my architecture, I have Linux node pool, right, of probably like 3 to 5 of them. And then there's a Azure load balancer that exposes or helps with the public application traffic to go from your client browser into the cluster via like Ingress controllers. Okay. And then next you have down here, let's say Azure Container Registry. Okay, that will be a repository of your Docker images. Okay, so when you're deploying your application, they had to go in through Docker images. Okay, and popular way is of course using Helm to install and deploy those applications. Okay, into your a specific namespace. Okay, you could use also Docker Hub, which is a public repository, right? So an example is, let's say this Prometheus monitoring, which is again open source software, Grafana, or even Nginx. Those container images are hosted in, let's say, the public Docker Hub repo, and you can pull them from there. And then what about role-based access? Okay, so with Azure Kubernetes Service, we can leverage Azure AD to manage through your Azure accounts or your Azure identities. Okay, whether it's your admin account or a developer with certain rights or IT operations with certain rights. So maybe a project team, a developer or dev can only be can only have rights to a certain namespace, where IT operations can have access and administer the entire cluster, right, across all the namespaces. And then we can leverage Azure Monitor and Azure Log Analytics Workspace for monitoring. Okay, and for persistent storage, we can have you leverage Azure Managed Disks. Okay, this is particularly important for like databases, right? Because if you know that containers, they're ephemeral, they die, they have a life cycle, right? They can be killed and terminated. But when you have a pod that's that has like a storage like kind of role, right? Then it can bind back to a disk and get the your data back, okay, such as like a SQL database that's hosted in. But there's a lot of options. Like I don't have here using Azure SQL. If you don't want to host like a SQL database inside your cluster, but you want to do it outside, there's that option. So basically, my demo architecture is really leveraging these types of services. Okay, moving on. So why don't I show the Azure portal? Okay. Let's see here. Which screen do I go to? Is it this one? Okay, got it. Okay, right here. So let's start at the top. So I have, I'm in Azure portal, and I'm using this Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so to give you some key areas that we care about in terms of managing your cluster is really the node pools. Okay, so I have here one node pool, and we can add more node pools, but this is kind of Linux based. Okay, and we can add another node pool if we want to support like Windows based containers. Okay, that has that that option, and this is actually generally available now, and that's well supported. So you have that option that if you're developing applications that are very Windows centric, right, and you're leveraging Windows containers, and you can deploy them into AKS through the Windows based node pools. Okay. And in terms of scalability, okay, if I click on the node count here, you can have like either manual or auto scale. So I have it at auto scale, and each of these VMs, they have this VM sizing, standard D2, V3, right? 8 gigabytes of memory each, okay? And so your cluster can auto scale as it knows that it has more demand, for its kind of CPU resources. Okay. And one really neat thing about the Kubernetes, Azure Kubernetes service is that as Kubernetes gets updated, we can very easily, just with literally 2 clicks, can upgrade to the next version. Okay, so 1.18 is one that's available. So basically what happens is that the Kubernetes open source software, like I think Microsoft basically does a fork of that and then makes it adjustments so that it works in AKS, and then releases a version, like let's say in this instance 1.18. Right now it's preview, but I would say every month or so, these things become available. Okay, like they come out of preview. And there's a networking component to it as well. I won't go into details, but it is bound to Azure Virtual Network. Okay, so whether you have an existing virtual network or you're going to create a new one with AKS, that's what would happen. Okay, so really tight integration with kind of Azure as a whole. Okay. And here in terms of insights is your monitoring, and we'll get into this later on. Okay, but so one last thing, that if you're learning to do AKS, is that it's really an IaaS infrastructure behind the scenes. So in order to see that, there is a special resource group that's created called, it usually starts with MC_, okay, and then we get to that infrastructure resource group, and behind the scenes is really all these Azure resources that gets created. So here is your node pool, your AKS VM scale set, right? So this is basically five VMs, right here, 5 instances. Okay, actually, wait a minute, these should be started. Okay, and let's go back here, and this one had a VNet created when I created this cluster, and basically each pod in the cluster gets an assigned IP address. Okay, and then we have a network security group. We have our load balancer, right? So I've set up a public IP address. Okay, and then I had my DNS, like those URLs in these applications, right, point to the public IP, right? That's bound to this load balancer. Okay, and the backend pools is really essentially the virtual machine scale set. Okay, and then I have a bunch of managed disks that I've set up, managed identities, right, for basically service principals, right? So that's an important thing to note, is the infrastructure resource group. Okay, so one scenario where, as if you're starting out in kind of dev test scenarios that I do, is that I go into the node pool right here, and to save on costs, I would start and stop the VM scale sets. Okay, not recommended in a production scenario, but that's what I do to save on costs, right? Once I'm developing, I hit stop or deallocate on this VM scale set. It shuts down my VMs, and I save quite a bit of money or Azure credits. Okay, so this is where you have to kind of manage it yourself and to save on costs. All right.
I think why we have a question for you.
Okay, great. Yeah.
If you check.
Okay, let's see here. In the coming days. Sorry. Okay, I'm just trying to. Okay, do you have support from Microsoft for your cluster if you choose preview version of Kubernetes? Good question. So technically you don't have support, but you can always create a ticket. They're not gonna say no, right? So I believe in this case right here, let's say you can do an upgrade, right? And you choose to do this, and it's not, my suggestion is always like create a, like down here, create a support request, okay? And there's different types, like there's like a paid, different tiers like premium support and all that stuff, right? In my experience, they will do their best to support preview features, okay? It's also beneficial for them to do so because they want to get feedback on a customer's experiences with preview as well. But in a production scenario, there's no like SLAs that they have to promise or guarantee, right? So that's how I approach that. So if you're going to go into production, that's where you want to take into consideration that not to go into preview, or if you have to, then you just have to manage that risk there. Okay, hopefully that answers your question. Okay. So no more questions, I see. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so that's the Azure portal. Going through that. Okay. Next is so we turn that on. Okay. Next we have, let's say, sorry. Switching over to, okay, so another tool that I use to manage the Kubernetes cluster is really Visual Studio Code, okay? And there's something called a Kubernetes VS Code extension. And we have here, let's see, let me make this, hopefully people can see the text. It's not too small. So I have these namespaces right here, okay? And we can always select a namespace by going right-click, use namespace. Oops. And then you get a star. We see the nodes that are there, okay, and they're all green lit. Okay, that's great. Okay, whoops. Some of them are red. Oh, that was that WordPress one. Okay. Etc. Okay, and then we have workloads, and then deployments. So right now we're in that book info app, which is that microservice Istio application. Okay, and these are the various services. Okay, the detail service, product page, etc. Okay, and the review service. And then we get down to the pods. Okay, so we have at the pod level. So to talk about what's a deployment versus a service versus a pod, like that's an entirely different like session to unpack. But maybe in the future I can do one, or I'll explain in a YouTube channel, or you can always kind of Google it. But in a nutshell here, without going into details, as it'll take a lot of time, is that here's one way of kind of navigating and looking at all the objects in your Kubernetes cluster, okay, and also your application. So this is really your book info app right here, okay, and network, your services, etc., the product page, it's in the whoops. And then the ingress exposes the application out. Okay. Oh, okay. The ingress is in a different namespace. Storage, you know, such as persistent storage, configuration settings, certain secrets like TLS, certs, or, you know, just string, you know, database connection strings can be stored here, etc. Right, and then you also have, let's say, the command line. Okay, so kubectl get, let's say, the pods. Okay, and I'm in that book info namespace. So by doing get pods, I see the pods here that are running. I can do get services. So service is really an abstraction layer. Whoops, kubectl get services, right? Is an abstraction layer, a network abstraction layer that will provide like network traffic into those those pods, right? So we have that. Okay, so kubectl right here is really your command line interface, right? And then that goes into communicates to that Kubernetes API server, which is on the cluster, the managed side. Okay, so let's see here. Whoops. So I was supposed to say get nodes. So we have here basically the nodes are the VMs. All right. Okay. So let me just show you another thing here. Let's see if my dashboard was working. Maybe because I didn't have that those VMs running. Let me try this one. Okay, awesome. So let's see if I can do that. Let's see. Try kubeconfig. Okay. So do token. Let's see here. So to get the token, let me if I can grab that token really quickly. So the token is really to go into my Kubernetes dashboard. I have to grab a token here. Okay. And I run this command right here. Let's see here. Did I get it? Let me try that one more time. Okay, this token, copy, paste. All right. So we are in the dashboard, Kubernetes dashboard. So this is another main tool that you use to manage your application. So again, let's go to the top, right? So we have our namespaces, okay, as I mentioned. The nodes, which are the VMs, we see the CPU usage, its memory usage, persistent volumes, which I'm leveraging Azure Managed Disks. And then we can toggle between the different namespaces. So right here, book info app, as I showed you, and then go to the overview. Let's see here. So for this book info, this namespace, this is the CPU usage, deployments, the pods, the usage of each pod, services, etc., etc. Okay, without going into details, right? And then we can toggle between other applications as well. Okay.
Any questions? Let me check. No.
Okay. So this is a really neat tool.
Yes.
Yes.
Just saying that there is no question so far.
Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. So we have that. Okay. So let me try to do some. see here. So I have this little load testing tool here called Siege, and it's being run. So the next little demo I'll show is really something called Kiali to see the traffic. So let's see here. Okay, so we go to this one here. Okay, so just refresh here. Okay, so right now what we're seeing is really that book info app. Okay, and again, there's the product page, which is really the front end of the web application, details, reviews, ratings, etc., etc. Okay, and Kiali is really a kind of a visualizing your service mesh. So let's try this one here, traffic animation. Okay, great. Okay, so we can see traffic animation, right? The traffic coming in. So right now, what we have is, okay, through that Ingress gateway. Okay, right now, what I just showed you before is like a little load testing tool called Siege, and that's really throwing traffic, against this application right now, right? And it's going to the product page, and the product page is calling out for the detail service and the review service, and then the review service is going out to call out for the rating service. Okay. Okay, I want to switch over to the version app graph. Okay. Here's another point of view, and we can see. Let's see. So I'm request percentage. Okay. So in this case, the product page is calling out to the review service, but there's 3 versions of the review service, right? That's evenly distributing, right? Like version 1, 2, and 3, right? So this is an example where you can have like A/B testing, right? You deploy a newer version, and then you want to test out the newer version, but you want 33% of the traffic, testing it out, right, for stability. And then you come out with another version, and you want to test that out, and you want to give some traffic to another version, right? So let me show you. Let's see the application. So this is the application effectively. Okay. So again, the page itself, the entire is product info. Okay. This left side, book details, is the detail service right here. Okay. The review service right here, right, that's showing, is also calling the rating service. Okay. Which is really the amount of stars. Okay, but for the review service, the 3 versions. Okay, so one version shows red stars, one version shows no stars, right? That has no ratings. Okay, it doesn't show any ratings. And then another version, I'm doing refreshing right here. Try to get to the black stars. See, okay, so we got black stars, right? So that's another version. Okay, so the first version has no stars, doesn't call out to the ratings, but the ones with the red and the black stars are calling to the rating service to find out the number of stars, right? So this is an example of how, this what looks like a very simple application, and could be done with just one container or really one service, basically, right, is split up into many services. Okay, and with it, so this is leveraging Istio. Okay, I'm not going to go into implementation details, but once you use Istio, you really can manage the deployment of your application, the traffic management. It's really at the HTTP level, right, or TCP or gRPC, but really at the HTTP level. Okay, so the review service is evenly distributing across three versions. Okay, we also have the option of response time, right, which is pretty important. Yes?
Yeah, I think you have another question related to Kiali.
Okay, great. So I'm reading here, is Kiali the same thing as Istio? If not, how are they different and which one is better? Okay, so again, Kiali is another open source software that works with Istio. Okay, so Istio is an open source software. Okay, but however, they're kind of part of the same kind of little ecosystem here, right? So in short, when you install Istio, okay, let me go to the Istio site documentation, Istio docs. And I don't know, concepts, setup, you know, and you go through the installation steps, right? Yeah, you download, you know, there's a command line, et cetera, right? I use a standalone, I would use a standalone operator install. But anyways, what this does is also installs Kiali as well, right? And even installs Prometheus and even installs Grafana, which is other open source software. So they work hand in hand together, okay? So they work very close together. So what you see here, the Kiali console gets deployed into your cluster and will know how to really like inspect or the microservices, the Istio kind of you know, traffic, right? So in general, you can call Kiali as a service mesh visualizer, which works with Istio. So hopefully I answered your question there. Okay, so they work hand in hand. Okay, so so I set this as response time. Okay, and we see 87 milliseconds. And we see response time as well here on the other services. Okay, so that's the really cool thing about it. Okay, so I can go to, let's say, what's another one? Guestbook app right here. So this one is not using Istio, but it can't really pick up on really good details. Let's see here. So give it some traffic. Let's hit refresh. Maybe we'll see something. Display response time. So it wouldn't know how to visualize things properly or the way that these services are related. But you can take an application such as the Guestbook app, okay, which is an example through the AKS Microsoft documentation, and you can apply Istio to it, okay, with YAML files. You don't have to code. You don't have to, like, let's say you're doing C# or Node.js. You don't need to code into it, okay. It's just when you deploy it with YAML files, you know, it's how you describe your deployments basically, okay. But that's a completely another discussion there, okay. So that's how that works, okay. Let's see here. So that's just an example of how I'm showing other applications, okay. So that's that, okay. Let's go back to, let's see here. Okay, the Siege is still working against that, which is pretty cool. So let's go to the Kubernetes dashboard. I want to hit refresh. And as you can see here, right, because I used that Siege load test tool, the CPU usage increased, okay, by quite a bit, okay, using 0.4 CPU cores, okay, and we see that kind of rising, especially at the pod level. We see it rising as well, okay. And let's see your deployments. Actually, I was expecting the product page to auto scale at the kind of the pod level by creating 2, but it didn't. But that's another capability of Kubernetes, is auto-scaling kind of at the pod level, okay, across pods. So we have that replica sets. Yeah, we don't see that there. Okay, so that's that. Okay, and then moving on. Let's see here. I can talk about. Let's see here. So back to my deck. So here's Kiali, okay, as an example. And again, this is that microservice architecture, okay, the product page, the reviews version 1, 2, and 3, okay. And oh yeah, one thing to note is that the example of the book info app is really is using different application like frameworks, right? Basically, the product page is containerized, and it's using Python. The review services, okay, is using Java, okay, and then the rating service is using Node, okay, and the details is using Ruby, okay, and it's really transparent to even for like the IT operations, you know what I mean? We don't really care. So we have that flexibility, right? So an example could be that let's say you're going to add another service, okay, like a shopping cart or whatever, but you want to use Go because it's got some unique characteristics that's better, okay? So you can write a Go service for, let's say, the shopping cart of this application, and you have that flexibility and that power to do so, right? And you don't have to change the existing application at all to accommodate that, right? So so that's another benefit of using Kubernetes and a microservices architecture. Let's see here. So Kiali, horizontal pod auto scaling. That's what I kind of wanted to show. It didn't really happen, but let's try going to, let's see here. So go to bash. Okay, let's try this command right here. Oops. kubectl describe HPA. Okay, so kubectl actually get HPA-n for namespace book info. So HPA stands for horizontal pod auto scaling, and I want to see what's happened here. Okay, let's try to describe. Let's get more details. Okay. So what we're seeing here is so that product page service, HPA controller was unable to. So the minimum replicas and the max is 5 that we can auto scale to 5, and the current is only 1 node. Okay, yeah, it wasn't able to auto scale because there's something in the cluster where it failed to get the metrics. So basically, it would auto scale if the usage goes above a certain threshold, and so it couldn't really measure the current one, and it didn't know how to auto scale. Okay, but in any case, this is just an example. Again, kubectl describe HPA dash namespace book info to find information, and so that's kind of the experience in terms of managing that, right? But in this case, what we're supposed to see is right here, resource on CPU is the 318%, which is above the target, and then it had auto scaled, from 1 to 4 and then to 5. Okay, new size 5. So that's auto scaling in Kubernetes. Okay. So the next thing I'll talk about is monitoring. Okay. So let me go to the next screen here. Okay. So what I'm showing here is Grafana. Okay, so this is hosted and deployed another open source software, okay, into your Kubernetes cluster, okay, and so these are some out of the box dashboards, okay, so some performance that we see here, performance dashboards. So virtual CPUs, you know, we saw a certain increase, memory usage, bytes transferred, et cetera, et cetera. So it can go very, very detailed, okay, in terms of managing your cluster as well. So there is a query that we can use kind of on an ad hoc basis. So let's see, for this one that I had prepared, the node CPUs, CPU usage, basically, right at the node level, okay? And then we can see that. So there's I believe, okay, showing 20. So that's what that looks like. Okay, another one, let's see here, CPU. So we can go down to, let's say, the container level, container CPU usage seconds total. Let's add the rate function. Okay. Let's see here, and so the last hour, and show all 370. So we can see right down at a very detailed level, right down to the container, okay, that we see. So some containers, so these ones would probably be the ones with that book info app, okay, that has the activity. And then there's tons of containers that are kind of low usage, right, that's going on. So that's another example here. Let's see, let's maybe get one more example. Curate, oh yeah, okay, so HTTP requests. Okay, so this is a pretty standard or popular one. HTTP, okay, let's try this one again. Requests, let the STO requests. Okay, fixed by rate. And so this is the HTTP request that's come through that Istio recognized, okay, through the service mesh. So you can go on and on and on, trying to have like an operational dashboard to make sure that you have a healthy cluster, making sure that you've right-sized your applications or your containers, allocating each application or pod the amount of CPU and memory usage, right? Because keep in mind that when you have multiple applications, you have the ability to really densely pack everything, but then you have to find that right balance, right? So that they can all have enough resources, okay, and then scale accordingly, right? So this is kind of Prometheus is that monitoring tool, okay. Any questions? Oh, okay. Let's see here. Go back to my slide.
You answered them all.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
I just said that you answered them all, so there is no new question right now.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, yeah. Oh yeah, another monitoring piece is that I said I'd show. Okay, let's see here. Just trying to find the right window here. So many windows. This one. Okay, oh yeah, back here. So we go back to the Kubernetes service. So you go to Insights. So there's a little bit of setting up here, but it's very easy, right? So this is monitoring that's done by Azure Monitor, Okay, and it's really specifically called Azure Monitor for Containers. So here we have at the cluster level, okay, node CPU utilization, memory, the number of pods we have over 100 pods, node counts, okay. Here we start off as 2, and then we turned on a few, and then went up to 5. And I think it auto scaled down here, went down to 4 and then 3. Okay, that's what's being shown. Let's see here. Okay, and then we can turn on live as well. Okay, just see general health. Get down to the node level, and then kind of drill in. And again, the product page right down to the pod. Okay, kind of see what's going on here. Controllers, and then you can drill down to each as well. And then a very flat view of all the containers, right? Which is like more than 100. Okay, system containers, even Grafana that we just I just showed right here, Istio components, all those things. Okay, and then your deployments as well. So, and Kubernetes. This I like, cool. Okay, I like this. Like for quick troubleshooting, when you're looking into, let's say, container, you deploy your application. This exposes your environment variables. So it's just a very quick GUI way of seeing what environment variables were set up, like for troubleshooting, right? Like sometimes it's like a connection string of some sort, or yeah, any configuration values. So that's a quick run through of kind of Azure Monitor for containers. And if we had live on, it will show it live as well, which is pretty cool. Let's see here, workbooks. So disk capacity, etc., etc. So I can go on and on. But you have so if you're to ask, okay, well, would I use the Grafana or versus this, right? Grafana for very detailed, granular level things, okay, and then Azure Monitor for a little bit high level, monitoring. And with Grafana, it's more customizable too, like having custom dashboards. Here, it's not that customizable. You can through, let's say, using Log Analytics Workspace, but you can generate your own queries and all that stuff, but that'll take a lot of time. Okay, where Grafana is a bit more easier to make queries, or you can find like out of the box like dashboards and charts that are fitted for certain application kind of workloads and sets. So yeah, this can get pretty. So I've done this. I've used this before for other projects, and yeah, it can take quite a bit of time, but because this Linux query can be applied to not just Kubernetes, but to any Azure resource. So last thing here, so this is cool. This is kind of new or relatively new, is Azure Advisor recommendations. Okay, so right now it just shows 4, right? So if you're kind of new and you want to start out and you're planning to go into more rigorous deployment, going to test and into prod, it's good to just check these out, right? Some security policies, have some authorized IP ranges to your Kubernetes API, which is a pretty good practice, or use a private cluster. So that's Azure Advisor. Okay. Here. Oh. Go back to my slides. So, okay, basically in summary, I just showed you running a bunch of applications organized by namespaces. Okay, I didn't talk too much about this. But I I've demonstrated exposing those applications out to to the internet, which is exactly this, right? Like you can hit this URL right now, right, and it's going through the Ingress controller. And the Kubernetes dashboard I just showed you for just like a GUI user interface to manage it, using the Istio service mesh and the Azure portal, right, to manage your Azure resources, and Prometheus and Grafana. I didn't show Prometheus just for the sake of time, but they go hand to hand. Prometheus is part of the monitoring. So I don't know, can I quickly show that somehow? Do I have it up? I don't think I can see here. Prometheus. Okay, here's Prometheus, right? So so Grafana plugs into Prometheus, and Prometheus does the whole scraping for the telemetry and the logs, and to get the information, right, and stores it. Okay, so I have here that query again, but Prometheus isn't very good at making like dashboards and charts and things like that. It's got very basic capability, but you would go to Grafana right here, right? Because it's got alerting, it's got like a full suite of features and capabilities for a real enterprise level kind of monitoring tool, right? And Grafana doesn't work against kind of Prometheus, but it can go against like any other like data source, that you can kind of imagine, right? So that's what it's geared for. Okay, so, going back to the slides. Okay, and then I showed Azure Monitor for containers as well. It's more of a coarse grain, high level, and so that's it. So again, feel free to email me if you have any questions. Check out my blog. I've kind of written some of these. Actually, I have a new YouTube channel. So just do a YouTube search, Roy Kim Azure. You'll find that. I have some like 2 videos there, and follow me on Twitter as I have some announcements. So anybody want to ask questions or take some time to ask? Or
yeah, thank you so much, Roy, for this presentation. If I remember, maybe you can share the address of your GitHub.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Because all the scripts, all the demo are hosted in your personal GitHub, and maybe this can interest people.
Okay, sure. So right here, github.com, Roy Kim YYZ. So I have some scripts here in my what I call the Linux scripts. So Kubernetes, it's kind of a little messy, but I have some here that if you're curious, okay, kind of my cheat sheet of Kubernetes commands. So it's in the Linux scripts repository. So feel free to find me on my GitHub right here, Roy Kim YYZ. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Maxime.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Roy. And for all the attendees of this presentation will be available on the YouTube of the community Azure Quebec. And you can just search that on YouTube. And if you want, you can rewatch this session. I think we have only one other question. It's thank you, Roy. I think somebody was very happy. That's nice. Thank you very much for your feedback, all. And thank you very much, Roy, for your time for this presentation. And that was a pleasure to have you on the stage, on the virtual stage tonight.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.